such a charming and sad and beautiful film. I feel like it fills everybody's heart, like just all the way, fills you all the way up to the top with so many emotions. I have lots of questions for you, but first I think it would be nice to hear about how Grace came to be. How was she birthed?
Sure. Well, firstly, Barbara, thank you for having me, and also thank you to the museum for not only having these screenings but also exhibiting our little blobs of clay. Well, it all started about 8 years ago when my father passed away. He was a bit of a hoarder himself, and he left behind 3 garages full of things, and my siblings and my mother and I are all annoyed with him for leaving behind this mess, and we spent weeks and weeks and weeks trawling through it. And this frustration with him then sort of transformed into interest, and I became fascinated with essentially why as human beings do we collect things we don't need, and why do we fill up our homes with things that are essentially useless. And I then started to read a lot of books on extreme collecting or hoarding, and then I started to speak to psychologists on the psychology behind why we collect and then hoard, and when it becomes a problem. And I discovered that extreme hoarders have usually had a degree of trauma in their lives, and more often than not the loss of a child or a twin or a sibling. So that really fascinated me. So that sort of sphere of ideas, and at the same time I was going through all my journals and notebooks, and I came across some notes I'd made about a friend of mine who's still a very dear friend, who was born with a severe cleft palate and had a lot of operations on her mouth as a child, and at school was bullied and teased a lot. Yet she grew up to be a very well-adjusted, confident extrovert. In fact, she became a sort of a nudist. She was renowned for, at parties, suddenly taking clothes off and dancing on coffee tables. And so that sort of fascinated me, that transformation of being very shy and introverted to being an extrovert. So these two sort of ideas merged, and then I just started writing and rewriting, and 16 drafts later, and 3 years it took to do the drafts, we ended up with this.
You talk about your films as choreographies, right? And you've sort of answered the question already in terms of how your films embody aspects of your personal story. There's a lot of sadness there. There's a lot of hurt there. So, maybe you can say something about kind of why you felt it was important to use this term choreography, what it means to you, but also how because these films take so long to make, is it difficult to sort of stay in that space, in that deeply personal kind of hurt space for so long?
Look, it is, and my films explore, they're essentially comedy tragedies. They explore the dark and the light, and really all I'm trying to do is reflect all our lives, and I don't shy away from exploring challenging subject matter and darkness. And I've always, reminded myself constantly that animation's not a genre, it's a medium, and it's a wonderful vehicle to tell any story you like and explore subject matter that you find curious. So yeah, it is tricky though to get that balance between the comedy and the tragedy, and then it is then hard to maintain that vision over a very long period of time. Our animators, we only had 7 animators, and each animator only animated about 5 to 10 seconds per day. So it's very slow art form, and you're doing everything in slow motion. But I think it all comes together in the editing. That's really where you get that wonderful balance between the comedy and the tragedy. And I certainly, I don't see, a lot of young people call my films depressing, but I don't see them as depressing. I see them as melancholic and real life, and again trying to reflect the ups and downs we all have. And again, they're not for little kids. They're for mature audiences, and I love that. I mean, I not that I don't like children. It's just that I love presenting stories that make the audience think, but also feel nourished by the end. I want you to feel I want the films to linger. So when you leave the cinema, you feel more curious about yourself, the world. You're kinder, hopefully, to your fellow man, but you've also had a good laugh. That's the other thing too.
Do you think there's some relationship between your sort of artistic intention in wanting to do all the things that you just said are important to you, and the kind of purist, perspective that you have for the filmmaking, that all of the effects are in camera, that there's no sort of digital overlay to that? Is there so why is that significant to you in your process, and how is it related to the vision that you want to achieve?
Well, I think I'm at heart a bit of a Luddite, and I'm a traditionalist. I love films from the 70s. I love American cinema from the 70s. Growing up as a child of the 70s, I have very romantic memories, and I loved that childhood I had. But I think, I don't know, as I've gotten older, I've become more of a purist in many ways, and so everything you just saw, every prop, set and character was handmade. There's not one single frame of CGI in there. So even things like the cigarette smoke was cotton wool, the fire was yellow cellophane, and all the tears in the film are actually made of sexual lubricant. So we can claim that everything you saw was handmade, and particularly now too with the arrival of AI, I think there's a greater appreciation of art forms that are handmade, and a lot of young filmmakers too are even going back to celluloid and shooting on film, and I think there's an appreciation now of things that have got that obvious human handmade feel to them, which is why at the end of the film we put that quote, "This film was made by human beings," just to remind the audience that this was not CGI. I think we're drowning in CGI, but ultimately it does come down to the story. It really doesn't matter whether it's clay or 2D, 3D, whatever. It's really the story that is paramount.
I mean, it seems like there's, even if it's hard to quantify the connection between the really sort of personal and intimate stories and the process, which is also very, very intimate and human. It's all human scaled. It's like deeply human. So you talked a little bit about your techniques, but obviously with such a small team, 7 animators for a film that long, it's incredible. Which of the scenes in the film we just watched was the most technically challenging, and can you describe a little bit about how it was achieved?
Well, look, I think there's so many challenges in stop motion. For example, the reason the characters don't have legs is walking's very difficult to do. So we choose to do the Muppet technique, and it's very apt being here because you have Jim Henson's wonderful Muppets here. So it's actually quicker to get the characters to walk on like this, like a Muppet, than it is to actually use their legs. So that's a challenge. Lip sync's incredibly difficult, getting the characters' mouths to mould into the actors' voices. But I think the shot in the film that was the most challenging was the opening shot, that opening montage where the camera glides through the horde. That took 2 weeks just to assemble. There's probably 3,000 or 4,000 little props all glued together. Had to be actually frozen and solid. And then we had a giant robotic arm that held the camera, and we programmed the robotic arm to go through frame at a time. And it's 1.5 minutes of one continuous animated shot. It's not shot in live action, it's actually shot frame at a time without a single edit. It's my sort of version of the film Goodfellas, that very long shot that goes through. It's actually the longest shot I've ever done in my 28-year career. So that was very difficult. It took 2 weeks just to animate it. And the only bit of actual animation is the toilet lid falling down with my name on it.
I mean, I guess you would sort of imagine that the most challenging scene would be something happening between the characters, but it was the sort of setup.
Yeah, that one, I think, well, then second would probably be the fire, the church burning down. That was incredibly complex, and we actually animated the flames separately on glass.
How did that work? Can you say?
Yeah, so first of all, we shoot all the characters, in the church, and Gilbert running and Ruth running, and we do all that first. and then we add the flames. We animate the flames on a piece of glass with a camera pointing down with a green screen underneath. So we had an animator in there for about a month just animating all the little flames out of cellophane. And then in post-production we sandwich them together. So we do a lot. That sounds modern, but actually green screen and blue screen is a very old technique. So we consider that a traditional technique. And we certainly use digital cameras, we use digital lights, LED lights. All the music is composed, is recorded digitally. So we don't shy away from digital technology. So it's a bit of, celebrating the old but embracing the new at the same time.
In addition to Memoir of a Snail, we're showing all of your films, over the next couple of days. So you should come back tomorrow to see Mary and Max and the Shorts trilogy. Can you say a little bit about how Memoir of a Snail differs in subject or in process from your previous work? So like when you sort of begin a film, is there an idea of wanting to sort of push the envelope in some way, either artistically or technically or personally?
Sure. Look, I think every film I really do try and push the boundaries, but also try and retain my style and my aesthetic at the same time. This is my 7th film. I came up with a very pretentious idea when I was at film school in 1996 to spend my life making a trilogy of trilogies, which would contain 3 short shorts, 3 long shorts, and 3 features. So I've done the 3 short shorts, I've done 2 long shorts, Harvey and Ernie, and now I've done 2 features. So I've only got 2 films left and then I can die. So yeah, I think, but again, with each film you do try and push yourself and just as you grow older too, you become wiser. Well, I hope you become wiser, you become more philosophical. I don't think you become more confident. If anything, I've become less confident. I think when I was animating younger, I was animating from intuition and instinct, and now I think I'm a little bit more self-conscious of what I'm doing. So you're trying to go back to that childlike state you were in when you were first making the films. But then again, I do like to repeat myself too. So there's plenty of visual motifs. Snails always reoccurring in my films. Death, I have a lot of death in all my films. I love unusual deaths. I love collecting ways people have died in an eccentric fashion. So I have very detailed notebooks too that I call my recipe books, and I've been touring with this film now for 6 months or so, and so I've been all around the world and I travel with my notebooks, so I'm always listening to what people are saying in airport lounges and cafes and writing down things I observe. I was listening to David Sedaris speak on one of the flights recently, and I mean, all writers have journals and notebooks, but mine are really detailed. Like I collect smells and I collect sounds, and my films have a lot of, there's a lot of description of how people smell. So Pinky smells like second-hand stores and old books and things like that. So I collect all this sort of detail and the minutiae of life, and then they become my ingredients for my screenplays.
That's beautiful. Something you were saying before about feeling more confident when you were back in film school. I was going to actually ask whether having, knowing that you had this bigger audience after Harvey Crumpet won the Academy Award and you were getting some, attention all of a sudden on the world stage, was it kind of harder to make these really personal films?
Yeah, you do feel with each film you're exposing yourself, you're showing, exposing your family. My parents and my family are always nervous when I start a new film, who's going to be in the next one, and I'm running out of family members. Yes, it is hard to go back, to make the films genuine is difficult, to make them authentic and believable is hard and gets harder because the audience also start to predict what you're going to say, and so I'm constantly trying to surprise you and make my screenplays unpredictable. And I think with this film too, Gilbert coming back is not what audiences, particularly audiences who've seen my other films, So, well, Adam kills all these characters, so Gilbert's not coming back. So this film, I tricked you into thinking he was dead and then brought him back. So this is probably the happiest ending I've ever done.
Did you feel protective over Grace? Like you wanted something nice
Oh,
to happen for her?
Yeah, I'm very protective. To me, they are real people. When I'm writing their stories, weirdly in my head, I don't imagine them as clay characters. I actually, like even now, I know what Grace looks like as a real person, and that's because I'm trying to create authentic, believable characters, as I said, and because really what we're trying to do is get you to suspend your disbelief, like any film, and for an hour and a half believe that these characters have a soul and a heartbeat, and that's very difficult to do. And one trick we use is empathy. Get you to really identify and relate to the characters. And what's been happening, which is really lovely, particularly with Grace, is getting so many letters and emails from people who feel they are Grace or identify with her, or she reminds them of a sister or an auntie or whoever. And that's what we're aiming for when we make the films, is that they are relatable in any country, not just Australia, but the whole world.
I think we have a couple of minutes. We can take some questions from the audience. Folks would like to ask. I will take your question there. You're quick to raise your hand.
Start now, or?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you had it. Well, I'm curious, you started to address one thing I was curious about. Among the things you found of your father's, what did you keep? And did that lead you to hoard things of your own that now you've mentioned a few things that you have hoarded? And have you thought about if this was a live action, who you would cast as the live action?
Sure.
And you must have been excited to have Nick Cave in here.
Oh, Nick Cave was
So
great.
I'm just going to rephrase a little so everyone can hear. The question was whether in going through his father's things, were able to retain anything, and what was the
Did that
second
lead
part?
to your hoarding?
Yeah.
Yes. Things? And then what?
Nick
Since
Cave.
you mentioned that they were live characters to you, I want to know who you would cast as them.
Who would you cast as the
Sure.
characters?
Well,
live
look,
characters?
yeah, Dad left behind he was, my father was an acrobatic clown, and there's a lot of links to this. And then he became a shrimp farmer. There's a film there.
That's the next film.
That's the next film. So Percy is actually based a little bit on my father. But look, Dad just had a lot of tools. He had just junk. The things we did keep were his hammers. Just some bits and pieces. And did I become a hoarder? Yeah, I did go through a phase. I started collecting bad taxidermy and filled up my home with chickens with distorted eyeballs. But I've cleansed and I've downsized, and I now live in a much smaller apartment. And who would I cast? I think I'd probably cast Sarah Snook again as the actual character.
So wonderful.
Yeah, she's a local. Most of the actors live in Melbourne, where I live in Australia, and Sarah's just got this beautiful shyness about her. This very self-deprecating, very humble, and that's what I wanted in Grace. Gilbert, Kodi Smit-McPhee, again, he has this lovely broodiness, and authenticity. So Kodi was an obvious choice. Jacki Weaver, again, I would just have Jacki Weaver as the real
Dominique
Pinky.
Pinon.
Well, yes, Dominique Pinon was an interesting choice because I'm good friends with Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who made all the Amélie and Delicatessen films, and I asked Jean-Pierre if he would do the voice of Percy, and he said, no, I don't act. He said, what about my friend Dominique Pinon? I said, are you kidding? Of course, I'd love to have. So Dominique Pinon is the lead in Delicatessen. He's the rubbery-faced clown in that. And then Nick Cave, well, we decided on him very late in the piece. We wanted a cameo, somebody to read the poem I wrote in a very melodramatic way. And we were thinking of, soap stars or athletes, or somebody who's not an actor necessarily. And someone just suggested Nick Cave, and I said, of course it has to be Nick Cave. So when we got him into the studio, he was in London, we were back in Australia, and we recorded him remotely. He came in and he said, Adam, so what sort of voice do you want me to do? I said, no, Nick, I don't want you to do a voice, I just want you to be Nick Cave. He said, "Oh, really?" And I said, "Yeah, he said, "How Nick Cave do you want me to be?" I said, 10% more Nick Cave." So he did it. And for me, it was very egotistical because I wrote that poem and I just, hearing Nick Cave read one of my own poems was very indulgent of me. But yeah, he was great.
Take another question.
Me?
Did someone say me?
Me?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
It was awesome film. I loved it. I was like up and down and up and down. I really want to know the title of the book that Gilbert was reading. I couldn't quite get it. I know she was reading Anne Frank.
The question is about the book that
Yeah,
Gilbert
what
was reading.
What was
at
he
the end.
reading? And
The hairy-chested pirate.
Okay. Thank you.
The ginger-chested pirate. Sorry, the ginger-chested. Some of those I just found on the internet. Some of them I invented. I just wanted there to be a nice twist at the end that she went back to serious literature and Gilbert switched and he went to pap in trash.
Okay.
But yeah, we had a lot of fun with the books too, and I wanted there to be a lot of classic literature in the book, in the film, because I love reading and I love reading the classics, the Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men and all the Steinbecks and so I love reading and it made sense too that as children Gilbert and Grace read because they don't have much else and all that Percy really can provide to them is the love of reading, and that sort of stays with them throughout their lives, and it's something they can escape to, because they have such traumatic lives. They can always escape to literature, which is what I do, which is I'm sure a lot of you do as well.
Thank you.
Oh, and then getting back to your roller coaster, I always say too that if you're not an emotional wreck by the end of the film, then I failed as a writer. So I'm so glad you said you're up and down.
I was.
It's all the emotions, all of them at once.
Thank you.
Take one more question. I see you pointing at yourself up there. Yes. Yep. I can't tell the difference because the lights are in my eyes, so you guys can choose it out, or we'll take both of them.
Okay, great. I just wanted to let you know that movie was heartbreaking and hilarious at the same time. It drove me crazy. It was so beautiful. I'm asking this question mostly for my college roommate who took a stop motion animation class last semester, and now she wants to pursue it as her career. And I've been watching her slave over Dragon Frame for hours. So I just want to ask, what would be your advice for somebody who wants to go in that specific career path?
So the question is, what would your advice be for someone who wants to be a stop motion animator?
Well, look, it's obviously not for the faint-hearted. You do need patience, obviously. It's never tedious, though. My accountant said to me a few years ago at our annual meeting, at the end of the meeting, he leant across the desk and he said, "Adam, don't be offended, but God, what you do must be tedious." I said, "Alan, you're an accountant. How can you say that?" So it is certainly all-consuming. It takes over your life. You have to be prepared to give up big chunks of time just to make one piece of art. This took 8 years, cost I think $4 million American dollars, which is not much. Well, I mean, relative to films like Inside Out 2, which cost $200 million and has just taken $1.8 billion at the box office. So our budget's what they spend on catering. So you certainly, and it is quite a solitude art form. On the film, yes, we had a big art department. There were lots of people making things. It was a fun sort of space, but the animators are in the dark for 10 hours a day moving things frame at a time, and we do employ a lot of people also on the spectrum because they love stop motion, and I'm generalizing, but more often than not it's because of the solitude, it's because of the they can really focus on one thing, this obsessiveness with one thing, and it's great. I mean, in general, they have fantastic work ethics. 9 o'clock, there they are, ready to go into the dark. So we really are a very eclectic group of people. We have, I mean, it's hard to get gender balance, particularly with the animators, but we we find that easier in the art department, in the production department. Post-production, there's a good gender balance. So very diverse ages as well. Australia's a very multicultural country, so we have a lovely array of ethnicities, and it's. I often feel that I'm sort of directing this big ship of wonderfully varied and interesting and eccentric people, and it's so great to just be amongst these fascinating people, because by nature I'm a very curious person. I'm always asking questions. You know, even when I get in a cab, I'm always asking the cab driver what do they do, what else have they done, and so I'm always studying people. And I think as an animator you need to have that sort of fascination with the human condition.
Then I'll take you the question from your neighbor up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments of my neighbor about like what a beautiful, wonderful film it was, and thank you for being here tonight. My question is, you said that this was supposed to leave us thinking, and there's obviously a dark comedic undertone to the whole film. So, was the idea of where we're talking about Pinky's husbands, how they both died, was it supposed to make you question if she had something to do with their deaths? You know, something
Wow.
Yeah. The question is, was Pinky maybe sneakily nefarious and had something to do with her husband's death?
Good question. I don't know. And look, I've been getting a lot of emails from people saying, "What happened to poor Ben, Gilbert's boyfriend?" You know, what you know, and I don't know. And it's up to you. I don't have to.
It's like Tony Soprano.
But I love saying to the audiences, you know, you tell me. You send me an email and tell me, you know. But the good news is, Pinky, my new film is going to be. It's not about Pinky, but it's going to be about an elderly woman who goes on a road trip across Australia. Because I'm sick of making films about characters locked in their bedrooms since the beginning. I want to break free and do a clay Thelma and Louise.
Yeah, we are here for it. We're absolutely here for it.
But don't hold your breath, it'll probably take 25 years or something. And there was a man here, I think he had a question.
Okay. Yeah.
Since the literature question came up, my first thing when I think of snails in literary capacity is Patricia Highsmith. And I was wondering if you thought, I'm definitely not going to touch on that because of what happens with snails in her work.
So the question is about Patricia Highsmith and whether there's any influence.
People who collect them, and at one point, there's so much hoarding in a collection of snails that the loop collapses and kills the person who was hoarding.
Oh wow, no, well I'm not
So I was
familiar.
wondering if you were familiar and you thought, no, that's
Is she American? Is she
American author.
Ah, okay.
Author
Yeah.
of Strangers on a Train and the
Oh,
Ripley-
okay,
the Ripley
yes.
books.
Oh, the Ripley books, yes. Oh, of course, yes. I've seen photos of her home with all the snails. Yeah, look, I have a fascination with snails. I always have since a little boy. I collected them. I put them in ice cream containers and touched their eyes. I mean, snails are, to me, you know, they're the perfect introvert. You touch their eyeballs, they retract into their shell, and I love that metaphor and I thought it was a perfect creature for Grace. Also, I love the swirl on a snail's shell. I love that as a visual motif and a symbol of life going full cycle, which is what the film sort of returns to its beginning. So there's a lot of links to snails, but the one I found out, and I did a lot of research on snails, and if you got time, Google snails mating. Oh my God. But the thing I really was thrilled to discover is that snails can't reverse, apparently. They can only move forward, or they can go around in circles. But that linked beautifully with my favourite quote by Søren Kierkegaard, that life can only be understood backwards, but we have to live it forward. So there was that link that, you know, I loved. Originally, the first draft was Memoir of a Ladybird, and the film was about someone who collected ladybirds or ladybugs, I'm not sure what you call them here. And but it was all getting a bit cutesy and saccharine and twee, and I thought, no, there must be an animal or creature out there that's a better metaphor. So it was right in front of me, snails.
It's hard to imagine this film without the snails.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here and making this beautiful film.
Thank you.
Please join us